It's not about hearing. It's about readiness. There's a difference most people never learn to recognize. Hearing is passive. It happens whether you want it to or not. Readiness is active. It's a state of mind, a posture toward the world, a willingness to receive something without immediately reshaping it into what's comfortable or familiar. Most people move through life surrounded by noise, not just sound, but opinions, expectations, interpretations, judgments. Noise tells them what success looks like, what failure means, who they should become, and how quickly they should get there. It fills every quiet moment with borrowed certainty. And over time, they mistake that noise for wisdom. They collect voices instead of insight. They repeat phrases they've heard before, adopt beliefs they've never examined, and carry convictions that were handed to them without context. It feels safe, familiar, accepted. But safety is not the same as clarity. You're different, not because you're louder or more confident or more visible, but because you pause. You listen. You don't rush to respond just to prove that you're engaged. You allow space between what you hear and what you decide it means. You question, not to impress, not to dominate a conversation, but to understand. That alone sets you apart more than most people realize. That kind of listening is rare because it requires restraint. It means resisting the urge to turn every moment into a performance. It means letting uncertainty exist without immediately covering it up with opinions. Most people don't do that. Uncertainty makes them uncomfortable. It exposes what they don't know, and so they rush to fill the gap with certainty, even when it's borrowed or shallow. I've learned over time that when you speak to everyone, you reach no one deeply. The message becomes diluted, shaped by the need to appeal broadly, softened until it no longer challenges anyone. But when you speak to the right person, even quietly, even without spectacle, the impact can last a lifetime. A single idea, delivered at the right moment, can redirect years of thinking. Progress rarely announces itself. It doesn't always arrive wrapped in confidence or applause. It often begins in small moments, in conversations that never make headlines, in thoughts that are shared carefully, between people who are willing to think honestly, people who are willing to carry truth without needing permission, without needing immediate validation. You don't need to be told what to think. You've never needed that. What you need, and what most people forget, is to be reminded that your thinking matters, that your ability to hold an idea, examine it from different angles, and let it evolve, is not a weakness. It's the engine of progress. The world moves forward because a small number of people are willing to sit with ideas long before they're popular, long before they're safe, long before they're understood. Those people are rarely celebrated in the moment. In fact, they're often ignored, doubted, or dismissed. But time has a way of vindicating patience. That kind of thinking can feel lonely. There are moments when it feels like standing in the dark, with nothing but a faint outline of what might exist someday. No clear confirmation, no immediate reassurance, just a quiet sense that something matters, even if you can't yet explain why. That's where real change starts, not in certainty, but in conviction that survives without applause. I'm saying this to you because you don't confuse attention with value. You've noticed that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the wisest. You've watched confidence masquerade as certainty, and seen how easily volume replaces substance. You understand that real confidence doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's steady, sometimes it waits. You don't rush to be seen, you prepare to be right, and that distinction matters, more than most people realize. There will be moments when doubt shows up wearing the disguise of logic. It will sound reasonable. It will present itself as caution, as practicality, as common sense. It will tell you to wait a little longer, to blend in a little more, to follow paths that are already approved because they've been tested and validated by others. That voice isn't always lying, but it isn't always telling the truth either. It speaks in probabilities, not possibilities. It favors what's familiar over what's meaningful. Every meaningful leap forward has required someone to ignore that voice at least once, to trust something deeper, curiosity that wouldn't let go, conviction that didn't need consensus, or a quiet sense that the future could be better if someone cared enough to build it even without guarantees. I'm sharing this with you because you understand that insight carries responsibility. When you see something clearly, you can't pretend you don't. You can't unsee a better way once it's revealed to you. Awareness changes the rules. It removes the comfort of ignorance. Once you recognize that, the choice becomes simple, though never easy. You either step forward, accepting the weight of what you know, or you spend the rest of your life explaining why you didn't. Explaining why the timing wasn't right, why the conditions weren't perfect, why someone else should have gone first. You don't need permission to think bigger than your surroundings. You don't need approval to question systems that no longer make sense. Systems exist to serve people, not the other way around. When they stop doing that, questioning them isn't rebellion, it's responsibility. What you need is the courage to stay honest with yourself when it would be easier to settle, to recognize when comfort is disguising itself as wisdom, to admit when a familiar path no longer aligns with who you're becoming. The future doesn't belong to those who wait for certainty. Certainty is always late. It arrives only after someone else has already taken the risk. The future belongs to those who act while uncertainty is still present, who understand that clarity often follows commitment, not the other way around. That's why this isn't for everyone. Not everyone wants that level of responsibility. Not everyone wants to think that deeply or carry ideas that can't yet be explained in simple terms. This is for someone who can hold insight without turning it into noise, someone who understands that real power isn't about control. It's about clarity, about knowing what matters and what doesn't, about acting from understanding rather than reaction. If you're hearing this, it's because you're capable of more than you've been told, more than you've been shown, and perhaps more than you currently believe. That doesn't mean you have all the answers. It means you're willing to sit with the right questions. Remember this. The most important conversations in life are rarely public. They're quiet. They happen between trust and intention. They don't seek attention. They seek alignment. This is one of those conversations. There's a reason I'm saying this only to you, and it begins with trust. Not the kind that's declared loudly or demanded quickly, but the kind that's earned slowly, almost invisibly, over time. Trust is not something you announce. It's something you demonstrate. It's built in small moments, in consistency, in restraint, in the space between what you could say and what you choose not to. Most people want trust without responsibility. They want the influence without the weight, but the two are inseparable. When someone trusts you, they're not just agreeing with you. They're placing weight on your judgment, your integrity, your ability to think beyond yourself. That weight is invisible, but it's real. You feel it the moment you realize that what you say, or choose not to say, can shape how someone else sees the world, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. That awareness changes how you speak, it changes how you listen, it changes how carefully you choose your words, not because you're afraid of making mistakes, but because you respect the impact words can have. I've learned that trust doesn't come from being perfect. Perfection is brittle, it shatters under pressure. Trust comes from honesty, especially when certainty isn't available. From the willingness to say, I don't know yet, without pretending that uncertainty is weakness. People can sense when you're pretending to know everything. They can feel it when confidence is used to cover insecurity, but they can also sense when someone is thinking carefully, when someone is more committed to accuracy than to appearance. When you're willing to sit with uncertainty, instead of masking it with confidence, people listen differently. They lower their defenses. They engage rather than react. That kind of listening is earned, not demanded. That's why I'm careful about who I speak to at this level, not because others don't matter, but because not everyone treats trust with the respect it deserves. Some turn it into status, some turn it into noise, some use it to feel important rather than to become useful. You don't do that. You understand that being trusted isn't about being chosen, it's about being steady, about showing up with the same integrity when no one is watching as when everyone is. You know that once you're trusted, shortcuts disappear. You can't say what's convenient, you can't repeat what's popular just to stay comfortable. You have to think more deeply because someone else is depending on the clarity of your thinking. That pressure isn't a burden when you understand it correctly, it's a signal that you're capable of more than surface-level engagement with the world, that someone believes you can handle complexity without distorting it. And that belief matters. There's a quiet disc, ip-line that comes with trust, one that most people never consciously develop. It's the discipline of knowing when to speak and when silence is the wiser choice. Silence is often misunderstood. People confuse it with hesitation, uncertainty, or weakness. But real silence, the intentional kind, is none of those things. It's restraint. It's respect. It's the space where ideas are allowed to breathe, when you don't rush to fill every moment with words. You give understanding room to grow. You allow ideas to mature instead of forcing them into premature conclusions. You let truth remain intact, instead of diluting it with urgency. In a world that rewards speed, choosing silence can feel countercultural. But speed is not the same as progress, and urgency is not the same as importance. I'm saying this to you because you don't treat trust as something fragile, but as something precise. You understand that once trust is broken, it's almost impossible to restore it to its original state. You can repair systems, rebuild structures, even recover from failure. But trust, once damaged, always carries a scar. That awareness changes how you move through conversations, decisions, and commitments. You think one step further than most people, not because you're anxious, but because you're responsible. You consider consequences others overlook. You ask yourself what happens after the moment passes, after the applause fades, after the immediate reward is gone. In a world obsessed with reaction, that kind of foresight is rare. The pressure that comes with being trusted isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up quietly, in moments where no one would notice if you took a shortcut, in moments where saying less would be easier than saying what's true, in moments where repeating what's popular would be safer than thinking independently. Trust removes the option of convenience. Once someone relies on your judgment, you can't afford to be careless with your thinking. You can't afford to let your words drift without intention. You have to slow down enough to understand what you're saying, why you're saying it, and how it might land. That level of care can feel heavy at times, especially when the world around you seems to reward the opposite: speed over substance, visibility over integrity, certainty over accuracy. But that weight is not a burden. It's a signal that you've been entrusted with something meaningful. Most mistakes aren't made because people lack intelligence. They're made because people are rushed. They speak before they understand. They act before they reflect. They confuse motion with progress. Trust demands the opposite. It demands patience. It demands that you respect the long-term consequences of short-term actions. You may not always be recognized for this. Often, you won't be. People who value trust over attention tend to work quietly. They don't announce every thought. They don't broadcast every decision. And quiet work doesn't always attract applause. But over time, something interesting happens. When situations become complex, when uncertainty increases, when decisions actually matter, people stop looking for the loudest voices. They start looking for the steady ones, the ones who didn't rush, the ones who didn't treat trust casually. That's when consistency reveals its value. This is why I'm choosing to say this only to you, because you understand that trust is not about being liked. It's about being reliable. It's about showing up with the same integrity when no one is watching as when everyone is. Carry that carefully. Not with fear, but with awareness. Trust, when honored, becomes a foundation. And foundations don't need to be visible to be strong. There's also a reason this isn't being shared publicly, and it has nothing to do with secrecy. It has everything to do with timing. Not every truth is meant to be shared with everyone at the same moment. Not every insight is useful without readiness. Most people assume information is power, but information without context, without discernment, without timing, is just noise. It overwhelms rather than clarifies. It creates the illusion of understanding without the substance. You've shown that you don't rush to consume ideas for entertainment. You don't collect insights like trophies. You let them settle. You test them against reality. You ask what they require of you, not just what they offer you. That's why this conversation belongs here, in this quiet spa. CE between intention and understanding. The world often rewards certainty, or at least the appearance of it. People like answers that sound complete, even when they're shallow. Conclusions are comforting. Questions are demanding. Questions require effort, humility, and the willingness to admit that the current explanation isn't good enough. You don't shy away from that discomfort. You recognize that progress usually begins there, not with answers, but with the refusal to accept easy ones. There's a danger in broadcasting ideas before they're ready. Concepts meant for careful development can become distorted when exposed too early. They turn into opinions instead of tools. Once that happens, they're hard to rescue. They get flattened, simplified, and absorbed into noise. You understand this instinctively. You know that some thoughts need protection, not from criticism, but from premature judgment. That level of discernment requires patience and humility at the same time, and most people never develop both. That's why not everyone hears everything. It's not about exclusivity, it's about responsibility. When you hear something at the right moment, it can shape your thinking for years. When you hear it too early or too late, it passes through you without effect. Timing turns words into leverage, and leverage, when misused, can do more harm than good. I'm saying this to you because you listen without immediately turning what you hear into a performance. In a world obsessed with sharing, you understand the value of holding something quietly and letting it reshape you before you try to reshape the world with it. That restraint is rare. Most people want to be seen thinking rather than actually thinking. You're willing to stay invisible while the idea does its work. There's courage in that choice. When you don't announce every realization, you don't get instant validation. You have to rely on your internal compass instead of external feedback. That can feel uncomfortable, especially when others gain attention for far less substance. But long-term impact doesn't come from speed, it comes from alignment. It comes from knowing why you're doing something, not just that others are watching. You understand that some conversations are meant to change direction, not attract agreement. They're meant to sharpen focus, strip away assumptions, and leave you with fewer but better questions. Those conversations don't scale well. They lose their power when diluted for mass appeal. That's why this isn't a broadcast. It's a signal. The people who shape the future rarely do so by accident. They make deliberate choices about what to share, when to share it, and with whom. They protect the early stages of ideas the way engineers protect prototypes, not because they fear feedback, but because they respect the process. You respect the process. You don't rush to claim insight. You wait until insight has claimed you. There will be times when you're tempted to speak, just to be heard, especially when silence feels like absence. But silence can be a form of precision. It allows you to choose your moment instead of reacting to someone else's. When you speak at the right time, fewer words are needed, and those words land differently. They don't persuade through volume, they persuade through clarity. This is being said only to you because you recognize that. Understanding is not a social activity. It's an internal one. Once it's established, it naturally expresses itself in action. And action, when grounded in well-timed insight, doesn't need explanation. There's a reason I'm saying this only to you, and it has everything to do with understanding rather than validation. Most people chase recognition as if it were a measure of truth. But real insight doesn't need applause. It doesn't need repetition to prove its value. What truly matters is not how loudly an idea is broadcast, but how deeply it resonates with the person prepared to act on it. That kind of resonance is rare. And that's why some things are said quietly, directly, intentionally. The world is full of noise. Opinions stack on top of opinions, judgments pile up without examination, and distractions multiply faster than attention can keep up. Over time, that accumulation does something subtle but dangerous. It distorts thinking. It makes clarity feel rare, and confusion feel normal. Most people adapt to this by lowering their standards for understanding. They accept familiarity as truth and repetition as validation. You don't do that. You've shown the ability to step back from the noise rather than drown in it. You don't assume that hearing something often makes it true or useful. You recognize that frequency is not the same as accuracy. That alone places you in a small minority of people who still treat thinking as a responsibility rather than a reflex. You don't seek approval before evaluating an idea. You let understanding come first, and only then do you consider its consequences. That order matters. When approval comes before understanding, thinking becomes performative. When understanding comes first, thinking becomes transformative. That level of discernment separates people who merely react from people who truly lead. Leadership, in its quietest form, is not about directing others. It's about governing yourself. It's about resisting the urge to speak before you're ready, to act before you're clear, or to share before you understand what's actually being shared. I'm sharing this with you because not everyone is ready to carry certain ideas responsibly. Some hear without understanding, some act without reflection, some share without comprehension. That isn't malice, it's the absence of preparation. You approach things differently. You weigh ideas instead of collecting them. You test assumptions instead of inheriting them. You consider the ripple effects of thought before acting on it. You ask not only whether something is possible, but ether. It's wise. That kind of thinking slows you down in a world that celebrates speed, and that can feel isolating. When others move quickly, immediate and certain, patience can look like hesitation. Depth can look like doubt. Silence can look like indecision. But those appearances are deceptive. What looks like delay is often discipline. What looks like restraint is often clarity and formation. Most people are uncomfortable with that process because it exposes the gap between what they know and what they claim to know. It forces humility. It requires sitting with unanswered questions without escaping into distraction or certainty. You're willing to sit there. That willingness is rare. That is why this message is for you. Because insight is powerful, but its impact is determined not just by its content, but by the one who receives it. The same idea can be harmless in one set of hands and destructive in another. Understanding without integrity can distort truth. Knowledge without responsibility can mislead. You've demonstrated the capacity to hold understanding without rushing to use it as leverage. You don't weaponize insight to win arguments or elevate yourself. You treat it as something that carries obligation. It's tempting in life to try to convince everyone of everything. Most people see communication as a numbers game. The more people you reach, the more influence you assume you have. But influence without comprehension is hollow. A message scattered too broadly loses context. Nuance disappears. Subtlety is sacrificed for scale. You understand the difference. You know that depth is often more important than breadth. That reaching fewer people in a meaningful way outweighs reaching many people superficially. That's why this isn't being said publicly. This is not about reach, it's about readiness. Depth requires attention, and attention requires trust. Understanding also demands responsibility. Once you recognize a truth, you can't unsee it. You can't pretend it doesn't exist or minimize it for comfort. Awareness changes what is asked of you. It creates a quiet accountability that's easy to ignore but impossible to escape. The choices you make after understanding determine whether insight becomes action or remains idle. Many people resist this moment because responsibility is heavy. It removes excuses. It replaces speculation with obligation. But you've shown a willingness to bear that weight, to let insight guide behavior rather than ego or impulse, to accept that knowing something changes how you engage with the world. That is why certain things are reserved, for those who can handle them without distortion. Not because others are incapable, but because not everyone is prepared. There is courage in listening without immediate judgment, in internalizing before expressing. Most people feel the need to respond quickly, to signal comprehension, to appear aligned with expectation. They confuse speed with intelligence. True understanding often grows quietly, away from the gaze of others. It matures in solitude, in reflection, in the willingness to let an idea challenge you before you try to defend or display it. You have the ability to let an idea incubate, to allow it to refine your thinking before you act or share. That patience is essential for real impact. Those who act impulsively, who prioritize appearance over understanding, rarely shape outcomes in meaningful ways. They create motion, but not direction. I'm sharing this with you because your capacity to internalize, reflect, and act responsibly is evident. You value substance over performance, clarity over applause, understanding over agreement. That combination is not common. It requires balance between confidence and humility, between curiosity and discipline, between awareness and action. Few people cultivate all of these traits simultaneously, but when they do, they become catalysts for change in ways that others cannot anticipate. There is power in quiet communication. There is power in reserving certain truths for the people who are ready, and there is power in acting on those truths with intention rather than impulse. The world often misunderstands silence as inaction, but silence can be preparation. It's where ideas mature. It's where decisions are refined. It's where clarity is achieved before action is taken. This is why this is not for everyone, and why it is for you. You understand that influence is measured by precision, not volume. That impact comes from alignment, not attention. That restraint is not weakness, but control. Remember that the impact of insight is amplified by the character of the person receiving it. Knowledge is not neutral. It carries weight, and that weight can either elevate or burden. The difference lies in how it's handled. You are someone who can carry it with discernment, someone who can translate understanding into action that is meaningful and deliberate. That is why I'm speaking directly to you, not because others are unworthy, but because timing, readiness, and integrity matter more than reach. Not everything is meant to be shared widely. Some things require careful attention. Some truths are transformative only when they meet the right mind at the right moment. There is also patience involved in that restraint. Most people want immediate clarity, immediate results, immediate validation. They struggle to remain with something that doesn't yet have a visible outcome. But you understand that some processes cannot be rushed without being damaged. That clarity forced too early becomes distortion. That decisions made too quickly often need to be undone later. You are willing to wait, not out of fear but out of respect for the process. That patience allows you to engage with complexity without flattening it, to hold opposing ideas without rushing to resolve them prematurely, to tolerate ambiguity long enough for deeper understanding to emerge. That ability is reasonably rare in a world that prefers simple answers to complex questions. But it is essential for anyone who wants to shape the future rather than merely react to it. This is why the responsibility that comes with understanding is not optional. It is inseparable from the insight itself. Once you see clearly, you are accountable for how you act on what you see. You don't look away from that responsibility. You don't pretend it's not there. You accept it, even when it complicates your choices. That acceptance is quiet, but it is powerful. It changes how you move through the world, how you speak, how you listen, how you decide when to act and when to wait. And it prepares you for what comes next. There's a reason this moment matters. Not because of what is being said, but because of when it's being heard. Timing is not a detail. It's the difference between information and transformation. The same words, spoken at the wrong moment, dissolve into noise. Spoken at the right one, they take root. Most people underestimate this. They believe that if something is true, it should be shared immediately and everywhere. They confuse urgency with importance and exposure with impact. But truth does not operate on volume. It operates on readiness. You understand that instinctively. You've seen how ideas introduced too early are misunderstood, how insights shared too broadly lose their shape. You've watched meaning flatten under repetition. That awareness doesn't make you cautious in a limiting way. It makes you precise. Precision is a form of respect. It respects the idea itself, the process that formed it, and the person who will carry it forward. Precision says not everything must be said now, not everything must be said publicly, and not everything must be said to everyone. That's why this is being said to you. Most people assume influence is about visibility. They equate being seen with being effective. But visibility without alignment is fragile. It depends on attention, approval, and constant reinforcement. The moment those disappear, so does the influence. True influence works differently. It's quieter. It moves through trust rather than attention. It changes behavior, not opinions. It shapes decisions long after the conversation ends. You've shown that you understand this. You don't chase recognition as proof of value. You don't need an audience to validate your thinking. You let ideas stand on their own, tested by reality rather than applause. That orientation changes how you act. It means you're not pulled off course by trends. You're not rushed into decisions by pressure. You're not distracted by the need to be seen agreeing with what's popular. Instead, you measure your actions against understanding. You ask whether something is aligned, not whether it will be noticed. That's a difficult way to move through the world. It requires patience in moments where speed is rewarded. It requires confidence without reinforcement. It requires the ability to stand still while others rush forward, knowing that movement alone is not progress. Most people avoid that discomfort. They choose motion over meaning, reaction over reflection, visibility over clarity. And because of that, they spend much of their lives responding instead of directing. You don't. You pause long enough to choose. That doesn't mean you hesitate indefinitely. It means when you move, you do so deliberately. Your actions are grounded in understanding, not impulse. And when you act from that place, explanation becomes unnecessary. Action rooted in clarity carries its own authority. This is where readiness becomes visible, not in what you say, but in what you do, not in declarations, but in consistency, not in promises, but in follow-through. Readiness is not the absence of fear or doubt. It's the ability to act despite them, without letting them dictate your choices. It's the willingness to accept responsibility for consequences rather than outsourcing them to circumstance or timing. You've demonstrated that willingness. Responsibility is often framed as a burden, but in reality, it's a form of agency. It's the moment you stop waiting for permission and start owning the impact of your decisions. It's when insight turns into direction. Once that happens, something shifts. You stop asking whether you're allowed to act and start asking whether you're willing to be accountable for acting. That shift is subtle, but it's decisive. Most people never make it. They stay suspended between understanding and action, collecting insights without committing to them. They know just enough to feel informed, but not enough to feel responsible. You've crossed that line. You understand that awareness creates obligation. That seeing clearly means you no longer get to pretend you don't see. That doesn't mean you act recklessly. It means you act intentionally. Intentional action doesn't seek drama. It doesn't require an audience. It doesn't need to be framed as bold or disruptive. It simply moves in the direction that understanding demands. That kind of movement often goes unnoticed at first. It doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly, incrementally, through decisions that may seem small in isolation but compound over time. This is how lasting change actually happens, not through moments but through patterns, not through declarations but through discipline. You understand that. You know that consistency outlasts intensity, that alignment outperforms enthusiasm, that direction matters more than speed, that understanding shapes how you engage with the world. You don't rush conversations, you don't force outcomes, you don't mistake pressure for importance. You listen, you assess, you wait when waiting is necessary. And when you move, you do so with purpose. That balance is rare. Most people swing between hesitation and impulsivity, between overthinking and underthinking. You occupy a narrower space, one that requires constant calibration. It's not comfortable, but it's effective. This is also where integrity becomes visible. Integrity is not about moral signaling or self-image. It's about coherence. It's the alignment between what you understand, what you say, and what you do. When those three are aligned, trust forms naturally. Not because you demand it, but because people sense consistency. They sense that your actions are not reactive, that your words are not performative, that your decisions are not arbitrary. That kind of trust doesn't spread quickly, but it spreads deeply. And when it does, it creates stability in uncertain environments. In moments of confusion, people look for coherence. In moments of pressure, they look for steadiness. In moments of consequence, they look for judgment they can rely on. You've shown that you can provide that. That doesn't make you responsible for everyone. It makes you responsible for yourself and for the influence you inevitably carry when people pay attention to how you move. Influence is not something you apply, it's something that emerges when others observe consistency over time. You don't choose to have it, you choose how to handle it. And handling it well means restraint. It means not using insight as leverage, not turning understanding into authority, not mistaking being trusted for being superior. You've avoided those traps because you understand that influence is fragile when tied to ego. The moment it becomes about identity rather than responsibility, it starts to decay. So you stay grounded, you stay curious, you stay willing to revise your thinking when reality demands it. That willingness is critical. Readiness is not static, it's maintained through attention, through humility, through the ability to say, this still makes sense, or this no longer does. You don't cling to ideas because they're yours. You hold them lightly enough to let them evolve. That flexibility doesn't weaken your position. It strengthens it, because it keeps you aligned with reality rather than with past conclusions. Most people resist that. They defend what they once believed even when it no longer fits. They mistake consistency for integrity. But integrity is not about never changing your mind. It's about changing it for the right reasons. You know that. This is why this message ends not with instruction, but with recognition. You don't need to be told what to do next. You already know, you've known for a while, what matters now is not accumulation but execution. Not more insight, but application. Not more preparation, but commitment. That doesn't mean rushing into action for the sake of movement. It means allowing what you already understand to inform what you choose next. Small decisions count here. The ones no one sees. The ones that don't feel significant in the moment. The ones that set direction quietly. Those are the decisions that shape trajectory. You don't need certainty to make them. You need clarity. And clarity doesn't mean knowing every outcome. It means knowing why you're choosing one path over another. That's enough. This message was never meant to convince you of something new. It was meant to align you with what you already recognize, but may not always articulate. You don't need more noise. You need trust in your own discernment. You've earned that trust. The world will continue to be loud. Opinions will continue to compete for attention. Pressure will continue to reward speed over depth. None of that changes. What changes is how you respond. You don't have to engage with everything. You don't have to explain yourself to everyone. You don't have to act on every impulse or defend every decision. You move when it matters. You speak when it adds clarity. You remain silent when silence preserves meaning. That restraint is not withdrawal, it's focus. And focus is what allows influence to remain precise instead of diffuse. This is why this message was shared quietly. Not because it's fragile, but because it's specific. Not because it's exclusive, but because it requires readiness. You have that readiness, not because you're flawless, not because you're certain, but because you're willing to carry understanding without distortion and act on it without spectacle. That combination is rare, And that is why this was for you.